da 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 da. My good friends, my good friends, my good friends. So the first, everything, cause it makes me better everything. My good friends, my good friends, my good
It does, but usually that's the best part. The part you always say, "Oh, I should have hit record already."
We only did that one time where we did it after the fact. I just saw Dwayne.
Oh, how is Dwayne?
Good. And it was like we'd stopped,
Oh, and then he told us the story.
We stopped, and then he started telling a story, and I was like, hold on. Because I knew the story, and it was amazing, right? And like this great story about him in India. And so I was like, I'm hitting record for this. So we just added it at the end because I was like, this is so good. It's so funny. It's like the funniest story.
It is. Now I find Ben's India story very funny, even though he was near death. Yeah, I admit that
was actual
it's
hell
funny
for
because
me,
he's here, because he's alive, and it's okay. The first time he told me that story, we did record it, and I sound like I'm dying, like just from the recording, because I'm laughing so hard that I'm just wheezing into the mic. So it's fantastic. Dwayne's story is a much better one because he was never in danger of death.
Yeah, or maybe the worst moment of my whole life, but okay.
But it's because you survived.
I did survive. That's true.
And you made it.
It makes you better.
That's right. So, yes. Yeah.
Now, if I'm going to quote Ramie here, Ramie would say, rub some dirt on it. Because that's his philosophy. When things are just about to take your life, it'll heal, or rub some dirt on it. That's the advice from my boyfriend, Ramie Phillips, our guest here today. Welcome
to the
podcast.
To the show. So we had Ramie, who's an expert in cybersecurity and a hacker, even though he's on the good side.
He's on the good side now.
We had to clarify that.
Yes.
Came to Fort Lauderdale and was at our forum, and we did a fireside chat about cybersecurity and scared everyone half to death. So that was good, which was fantastic. And then we had Missy come up, who's at Memorial and who had gone through a cybersecurity ransomware attack years ago at Memorial in Ohio, and she talked through that, and that was incredible on so many levels, in a terrible way, but also just good to hear her story. So I thought it'd be good if we had you back and did some more on this, or maybe rehash some of it. But
sure.
Yeah, that was my thought. I don't know.
For sure.
What was yours? Did you have any?
Well,
you hear this all the time, so you get bored by this.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm bored of it. I would say it's really interesting we were just talking about this last night on the phone, like even from an industry perspective. Ramie currently works in manufacturing. And one of the points that he made, he's like, if you ask someone in where I work, what's the first, who's in charge of cybersecurity, what would they say?
So, and this they would say them. So interestingly enough, like in manufacturing and defense, where I've worked in the past, and if you ask anybody like in that area and say, who's responsible for cybersecurity, I would bet a majority of them would say I am. Because they
would feel responsibility
because they understand that they are.
I'm not in IT, but I still feel responsible.
Right, because they've had so much education over the last period of time, and they've done such a good job educating in some of these industries, defense and manufacturing in particular, where they're so deeply educated in cybersecurity, it's become ingrained in the culture. So now what happens there is that all of the people are. When you join the company, you get a cybersecurity primer course. You get people with cybersecurity month in October. Everybody's all doing all this stuff, right? Like there's all this noise around it all the time, and there's all this focus on it. So I think what happens is that even the most junior developer comes in and they're interested in cybersecurity. Like everybody's kind of focused in that cybersecurity realm. What I've experienced in other industries is there's a lot of times when other industries will kind of say it's maybe the IT's place or IT's role or something like this. And one of the questions that we had in the forum kind of brings these two roles together, the business and the IT side, right? And the question is if you own an application, have you ever tested your restore? Right? You've restored your data, you've run your application, you've tested it, right? Have you done that? And that's that partnership between business and between whatever. Well, I can tell you that the owners, the product owners in my world would say, yes, I do it every 6 months.
Yeah.
And we don't see that in all worlds.
It
right?
was the most, out of all we talked about, the thing that stood out to me the most, that was the most impactful, was the thing around, we had everybody kind of raise your hand if you've done any testing, user acceptance testing on a backup.
Mm-hmm.
Not one person raised their hand.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not doing it.
2 years after,
And
an attack on your whole thing.
So they're not doing it. And then Missy talked about specifically that they did the backup.
They had the backup.
Had the backup, did it, and then they had to manually put in the accounts they missed, and then they weren't coming out right after they had done a ton of it.
And they wasted 2 weeks of input.
They wasted 2 weeks, and then to shut it down again, the whole system.
I didn't know that. That was totally unplanned. I can't
mind-blowing,
believe
right?
that she did that right after, right? Like, it was a perfect example of what I had said. I had no idea
of
she
like,
would
they
do it.
didn't do the testing.
Huh?
So I think I heard from a lot of people that one of the major things that people took away was that they had this like, I got to get with my CIO or CTO and like walk through like, how are we never doing acceptance testing? That is something we should absolutely have done, because then they're not really doing a backup, right?
They're not doing a restore. They might be backing it up.
Restore. Yeah.
But backups are useless unless you can restore them. Everybody's got a story in IT of a backup that couldn't be restored, and it's miserable. Everybody's got one. If you've been in IT for 20 years, it's a terrible thing, and we all want to forget ours. Right?
I wonder if they just think like, well, Epic's doing this. They've got it down.
There you go.
But the reality is like, they have to do it, and they have to actually try to restore it and actually have people who are the users do it, right? I mean, like, they have to test it.
Yeah, so users so that's the thing about Epic. Like, so if let's say you're a neurologist working in Epic, and you use Epic, and you have some plugins that are specific to you, and you have particular modalities that you use, all of these types of things, maybe extra things that plug in that are stored on other drives, those interrelationships, all of those things are what you do to do your job, right? Like, you should be able to have those available. So in the event that somebody came by and those were disconnected, what would you do? Is the question, right? And so if they haven't had user acceptance, and it may not be the neurologist, but somebody who knows how to use the application has to do it, because like what Missy had mentioned really was very salient point, is that they restored the data, and it restored successfully. And they said, we're good. And then they worked on it for a while. And then there was corruption in the data down the road, right? Like, so down the road, this is that integrity problem, right? There's confidentiality problems, there's availability problems, and there's integrity. And I mentioned that integrity is very insidious because it's often hard to detect and it's hard to fix, because it's not no data, it's bad data. Like, no data
and
is
somebody's got to figure that out.
Right. It's very different. So like and that's what it took them 2 weeks. And so the way that they did it is through user acceptance testing, because they went, I don't remember this date ending in a square box. It should end in an 8. Right? Like, that's what they were experiencing, right? Like,
no, it was crazy.
Hieroglyphics, right?
It was crazy. Yeah. So for everyone who wasn't there, Missy was talking about they had data enter all the patients they missed when it was closed down, right? So they had all this paper, which, by the way, the other thing that was striking was that they had run out of paper. That was the other thing that was crazy. Right? She's like, no, have backups on paper. We had to go to Staples and
they ran
2 hours
paper,
over in the middle of the night and get them to act like corporate to open up the store. That's insane.
That's awesome.
But she was saying around they were inputting like the ones that were missed, and they weren't finding it out until later when they go back to that person they inputted and being like, oh, the characters are all weird. Like, it'd be, say your zip code 48067, it was like 480, like you're saying, right. ampersand, like some crazy, like, what is that? Like, no one would have done that.
No.
So it took them 2 weeks to figure that out.
Yeah.
Like, think of that. Think of just the sheer amount of, like, force. Like, they had to, like, do all that stuff. They had just to get got caught up in the 2 weeks, and then to shut down again and redo it all.
Your whole organization was focused on that. Your IT guys, the first time it happened, would have said, maybe it's an isolated incident. Let's see if more come up. And then more start popping up, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, how big's the blast radius? And then the blast radius becomes your entire data set. And that's what happened to them.
Yep.
Right?
And start over.
Like, start over. Right? Like, and that's what you don't want to do. And that's why user acceptance testing is so important. Because if that was just me opening it up, I could have opened it up and closed it and went, yeah, I saw the data. What I didn't do is open it up, insert a record, close it, open it up, read the record. right? Like these are the types of user acceptance testing that you would normally do, right? You would write something and then you would verify that you wrote it properly and that the system is working properly. And then you could report on it and you could say, okay, I can write to the database, I can read from the database, and I can report on the database. These are the major functions that I use for my job. We're good, right? If you don't do those checks, right, you don't know that they work, right? Or if you use your program, you don't check that third-party application or whatever that you're using, because there's always some rider application somewhere on your PC that's really important. That's from 1980.
100%. 100%.
Those are the ones that are tough, right? You got to make sure those work too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's great. Important is that I was trying to think what else stood out to me. Why don't you walk through a little bit of I think the other thing is interesting, and I've heard you say this a couple of times around the analogy around healthcare, thinking they can just hire the number of people, but not the level of people.
Yeah.
Compare healthcare to the other industries. I think this is important.
So there's a lot of studies going on in the industry now, and actually it's happening in a lot of different worlds, and I've seen more and more data on it, and I've read more and more data about it. And so I'll apply it to my history on offensive security is what it's really called, the red teaming, which is a company pays you to attack their systems to test their security controls. That team. So what was really interesting is when I was running a global red team of a team of attackers.
Who get paid to attack,
systems, to find vulnerabilities, and we disclose reporting to the leadership. The leadership delivers it to the teams to remediate the vulnerabilities, and we work with them to remediate the vulnerabilities properly. We suggest remediation paths. We do all of those things, right? So if we find the bug, we also tell them, here's how you should fix it, right? We're not that's our job, right? That's what we get paid to do.
Yeah.
We do it before they do it because we're working for the organization, right? Hackers aren't. That's the difference, right? We're with them. So what came up was really interesting, and this dealt with kind of the problem that I dealt with in manufacturing. We work with a lot of Internet of Things devices, which are discrete devices. They're not like computers, but they run computer operating systems. So I say I would take a computer attacker, and I could make them an Internet of Things attacker in about 2 years. But it takes about 2 years to convert somebody who's used to attacking computers into attacking a device that's a computer, because they're different. They behave differently. Their hardware is different, and those types of things. And so what I learned during this time is they would come and they'd say, you know what we can do? And we can take attackers and we can grade them. And I started thinking about this. And so we came up with an idea of basically grade school. Hey, you go through, first grade through 12th grade. And 12th grade is your super uber. He's the best attacker. She's the best attacker. They are writing exploits that are immediately, available, can penetrate systems, control systems, all of the types of things that weaponized devices. That's the types of things that these people can do, right? At the top level. At the bottom level, people can kind of read something on the internet and maybe download something and click run on their computer, right? And that's kind of what they can do. And then so that gradient exists.
Right.
And what was happening
they're not all the same.
They're not.
Just like I may be a doctor, but there was doctors that graduated with a C.
Right. And then there's
right, and then there's world-class doctors,
exactly.
And the difference is always significant.
And so what was happening in industry is they were taking the world-class doctor and they said, this is the work that the world-class doctor can do. We think that 2 of these C doctors can do the same level of work that the world-class doctor can do.
If you just add them up and you get multiples,
you can
if
make
I have 4 of the
one.
C of the, let's say, 5th graders, I can get to
a 12th grader.
A 12th grader.
And that was
but
the
you
equation.
Cannot get to a 12th grader.
So here's what happened is I would take 3, let's say 3 5th graders in this instance, and you could put them side by side and you go 3 plus 3 plus 3 is 15, right? That's their HR power, let's call it something like that, right?
Sure.
Whereas the other one is just a singular senior guy with, or a person with a 12, right? And so they'd say, well, the 15 is greater than the 12. But here's the problem. In 12th grade, I was in calculus. In 5th grade, I was doing division.
Yep.
So what I do is I propose a problem that's algebra 2, geometry, or trigonometry. And I say, okay, you 15s.
You solve that.
Solve that. Solve that problem. Solve the 15.
And they can't solve it.
They can't solve it.
No matter how many 5th graders you put on that problem.
And so what happened in the industry is that people threw money and bodies at a problem. Like IT often will do it. Hey, we have a problem, chuck a tool at it. Like plug tools in. They start plugging tools in all over their ecosystem and it gets all disjointed and fragmented, right? Very common to see. They did the same thing in security where they kind of said, hey, let's put in some junior people and we'll get all these junior people. And it was hard because you have to have these leaders up at the top to bring them up to the places where they can do the mathematics that are required or the security work that's required to defend against things that are tough, right? A singular hacker at home is not the same thing as a nation state. Like you can do the same thing, right? Like, and so what ends up happening is you recruit these top level people. You see it in industry. Why is FANG so good? Why is Facebook, Apple, Alphabet? Why are they so good? They recruit the top talent. They don't mess around in the bottom stuff generally, and that's what they've done over the years. And they try to do that, right? And so what I see now is that people are saying, even within other organizations in software now, you're looking at all these tech layoffs. If you look really deep in the tech layoffs, a lot of these people were hired in and relatively new and stuff like that. A lot of the senior folks out there are still working. There's still lots of jobs out there, but the ones where people are coming in now go, you need to have this 5-year CISSP, and I know you're just getting out of college, right? They've said it's almost turned into a commodity, and now they can't grade talent anymore, and so there's this like mushy area, right? And that's what's happened in security in a lot of ways. And that's what's happened in the tech layoffs. And so until they reestablish this leaderships where these leaders can come in and then can build these teams and then can take all those 3 5s and bring them all up to 10s, right? That's what they need to do. But you can never be bigger than your top tech. And that's always the problem. When I was running a small business, I used to compete with other small businesses and I'd meet the owners sometimes. And sometimes the owners were competitors and they knew the same stuff I did. And other times the owners didn't know as much as I did. And I knew they couldn't compete at the same scale I did. They couldn't compete for a school. I was doing school security. They couldn't compete. They didn't know. I was doing military security. They couldn't compete. They didn't know. But they could get a little business. They could compete in that realm with me. And so that's what ended up happening, right? And likewise, there were competitors that were above me that I couldn't compete with, right? That would do entire, building systems or campuses, right?
I think it's interesting if I think about like the system that the most health systems are big corporate entities that have functional HR that has tried to function in like, I have this way I recruit and I have this bands and I have these, it's like, we've even seen this on the automation side where health systems are struggling to hire developers or even like people of that level. They're just even that high of a level, honestly. But they don't know how to recruit for it because it doesn't fit their mold.
Yep.
And if I think about this, I'm thinking, well, yeah, what they've done is here's the requirements. I've gone and sourced that on LinkedIn and I found out this is the average and this is the band we pay. But what you're describing, though, I think is the 12th grader is probably $300,000 salary plus, right? It's like, and their band is actually like 80 to 120.
That's right. That's what happens.
That's exactly what's happening.
It is. It's exactly what's happening.
And so they may hire like, we need 5 people to cover or whatever, or 10 people. But like the ultimate is like, they're actually not hiring. They can't even in their minds figure out how to hire those larger people.
Right. And they need to make the understanding.
But the same thing happened at Optum.
Okay.
Or Change, right?
Yeah.
Where Change actually just hired, or Optum, like they just hired one of the lead cybersecurity guys from Google.
Oh, that's smart.
And I bet they paid him a crap ton of money, right? Like
I'm sure
they paid him.
I'm sure it's a lot.
7-8 figures, right? Like they're going to pay him as much as they need to pay him because they need to solve that problem. But what was it before?
Yeah, but see,
it's
there's
probably the
top
same
guy.
thing, right?
But see, if they hired a guy like that who's that that's their new tech level. Before, whoever was in there before, that was their top,
you were always
right?
capped at the limit.
Yeah, and you're capped at your limit of your top technical talent. It's hard to exceed it. Just think about that in any industry. Think about it, right? Like you can't exceed the skill set that you don't know.
Well, I also think the other thing, I've said this for a while about healthcare. Healthcare is still, primary clinical care setups.
For sure.
But with the advent of like EMR and meaningful use and everyone moving to like electronic medical record, it actually became a data technical institution.
Yeah, decision-based medicine.
That wasn't the thing. So I just think even about the CIO role. Like I knew CIOs back when I started 45 years ago, which is crazy.
And they were worried about getting everybody a
No, it was like,
MacBook.
can we get computers? I have a help desk.
Exactly.
Can we get a T1 line? I remember that being a big deal.
Somebody set up some email addresses for me.
This is no joke.
And
I think about that guy who I knew
I would have loved to have a T1.
That guy 100% could not do the job today. And to think that they've been able to transition to that job that's required, it hasn't. I would say that they're still going through the process of trying to figure out and the level that's required and what's required of that person today versus even just 10 years ago.
So there's a major
So to think
difference.
that health system's been able to steer the ship quickly and change is like, there's no way.
No.
Even at the biggest institutions.
No, and you see it in the skill sets amongst the people. So 20 years ago, the top people were experts in depth in their field. They knew everything about a particular corner of their universe. Sure. I know this.
Yeah.
The best people today are agile. I know 20 programming languages, not one. It's because you have to be able to jump all the time. I'm always moving from a framework. Oh, you're in Azure. Oh, you're going to move to AWS. Oh, you're going to move to Google. I got cloud properties all over. So you have to be all of a sudden be agile enough to manage all of this stuff. And it happens so fast. All of a sudden you're one day on bare metal servers and the next day you're in the cloud. And then it's multiple clouds. And the clouds are going so fast and they're plugging in AI. And now your code development is half the time that it used to be. Like the world is moving like so fast right now. It's just at a rapid pace. And you're at a full sprint to gather as much knowledge as you can and be as agile as you can, because that's what's efficient today. The workplace of yesterday, being a subject matter expert in depth was important. But the problem is knowledge is almost transient today, because in a couple of years, the knowledge that we had a couple of years ago is being replaced by new knowledge. And it's so fast, you have to be so agile. So more like neuroplasticity is what's needed today than before was, deep depth knowledge, deep learning and stuff. It's being agile is what I would recommend today. If I was hiring people, and I'm not, but if I was, I would look for the ability to be agile and accept change quickly in the technical realm, because that's really what the skill set's like today, because they're fast.
Yeah, I hear you talking about this, my mind goes to like, oftentimes, healthcare gets into spaces, hospitals in particular get into spaces they're not good at.
Mm-hmm.
Like they got in, like a lot of these groups, like in the 2000s, got into like building their own and owning like a health plan.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
like that was the IDN kind of world, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're like, and there's still that it still exists today, but far far fewer than it did at the time, right? Like everyone kind of thought capitation was going to happen, and so they got into
right. I remember
right.
that.
They got into these health plans, but they also do other things that they're not good at, and again, majority of health systems are very good at the clinical care. Like you could say they're not, but I actually do believe that they are.
I agree.
But in this case, is the answer actually that this is one of those things they actually need to outsource to I'm going to say professional, but do they outsource this function because of the fact like they just can't keep up with it? Like,
so I've given this a lot of thought.
Like I don't know the answer. I really don't know. I'm curious to know your thoughts on like how do they actually get expertise, because I don't think they can hire for it functionally well. They may be able to hire one person well, but can they actually like create the system in which they would cover themselves in this in cybersecurity?
So here's what I think initially is one thing. There's two things you can do. I think that healthcare has enough money to hire whoever they want. I think that if they want to pay $300,000 to hire somebody,
they may disagree, but
but I mean, when you talk, we can look at balance sheets.
I know
right?
what you're saying.
They make decisions.
They're big enough.
They make decisions, right? They're
Yeah.
big enough to afford what they want on the talent side. What I think is most interesting about this, and I thought about this more after we had talked before, is that in the industries that I've worked, there's a lot of engineering people, right? And there's technical people, right? In the healthcare industry, they're a different type of person. They're feeling, they're emotional, they're different in a lot of ways. Whereas engineers tend to be cold and base it on math, and this is how it is. And here's what the data says, right? Like that's an engineer standpoint. Whereas healthcare people are interacting. I saw my dermatologist this morning. It's so nice and just genuinely nice, like interaction. And I think that the fact that they're like that as a general rule in healthcare, and that they're focused on patient care, is that it doesn't align necessarily with technical security, right? And so
No.
there's a bit of a diversion.
Yes,
there, right?
that would be
it's
my
hard
point.
for them. And to
It's
your
never
point,
going to be priority.
That's what I don't know.
Rev
how
cycles,
it could be.
I always say rev cycles always like low priority because you're never going to trump like the
That-
clinical care.
Saving babies, right?
Right.
That's, what are we doing here, Ben?
We're saving babies.
saving
Right.
babies.
Of course.
And we want them to do that. Like that's
Right,
what I
we
want
want
them
them
to
to save
do.
the
And I don't
Yes.
want that to be like, I
want to be
get
in their
it.
way.
But that's why I always made the argument that I
Yeah.
think actually health systems should separate that function and create a separate company,
Yeah.
even if they never do anything with it. Let
Yeah.
them function on their own,
Have their own governance.
have their own governance,
Mhm.
have their own P&L, so that they can manage it effectively.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is this an area where it's like, why are you attempting to do something you know you can't do well?
Yeah, I don't know. We've seen so things are changing. When I first started in the industry years and years ago, the CIOs worked for the CFOs, and all the security guys came out of accounting. They were all auditors, right? Like that's when I started the industry. Every security company I worked for were all accountants.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
That's what the 90s were.
That wouldn't be
Early
today.
90s. Well, no, but that's what the
Right.
early 90s were. That's what
Yeah.
it was like back then. So the world's changed a lot.
They were
right?
just auditors.
Yeah. So, if you have a separate entity as a healthcare company that's running a security department and has its own governance, the question would be is what role and where does it plug in at the greater organization, right? Because you have to be able to have a seat at the table at the organization at an appropriate level. If you're reporting to a C level and that's the top security guy, then that's not it. If you have a C level at that table and the C levels are parallel, right? Like where you have a chief security officer or a CISO or somebody of a level that's comparable with your CIO and those types of levels, I think the companies that we see that succeed in security elevate somebody to that level, at that level, so that the leadership table, the SLT team, has a security representative on it, and those are the things that we see. So if you were to separate the entity, I would say the key would be is that if it operated in a separate governance process, it would allow it for greater agility, right? Because you wouldn't have all of the red tape, perhaps. Maybe not. But the other thing you would have is where does it plug in the organization, right? Like that's really what, at the end of the day, how are they funded? Where do they come in, right? Like in a big org, that's what ends up driving projects, right? Because they come in and they say, hey, we want to spend $200 million to educate all the people. Who pays that bill, right? And how do they do that, right? If you were a separate entity.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I would think about.
No, it's those are all good thoughts. It actually makes me think of my friend Kyle, my best friend from high school. He's an air marshal. And most people don't even know these people exist, right?
Well, sure.
Oh, Ramie spots them regularly.
Yes.
There's an air marshal sitting behind me.
So he's been an air marshal since the beginning, right? So in 2001 he became an air marshal. What's fascinating about that is I've worked out with him in their facility, and they have like a live shooting thing, which is a cockpit of an airplane.
Oh.
Wow.
So it's a live where they do live ammo in a cockpit, but they also have in their workout area they have seats, just the 3 seats, plane seats, just sitting there, and then they have a dummy here, and you have to be able to. But there's also these things where he was a trainer for a while within it, trainer as in physical trainer, where they had to work out and they had to be in shape. And what's fascinating about the role is that 99.99% of your time of the entire agency will never do anything in the air. They will never act.
Right.
But they have to be ready for the worst thing possible.
Sure.
Because I'm always like, are you getting involved in stuff? And he goes, there's passenger unruly. He's like, I'm not getting involved in that.
Mm-mm.
That's the stewardess job, and the stewardesses are going to be able to handle that. And even if they can't handle it, if I get involved, that changes the whole situation.
And now, a word from our sponsor. This episode of My Good Friends is brought to you today by our good friends at Switch RCM. And Nate is here to tell us about physician underpayments. Tell us, Nate.
Physician billing underpayments are a real challenge for providers. Claim volumes are very high. Payments are lower than payments when compared to hospital-side payments. We created technology that can handle those large volume of claims, automatically identify underpayments to help our provider clients recover those. And we do that using standard 837, 835 claims and remittance and contracts. That's all we need to help providers unlock that underpayment revenue.
Folks, it's a huge issue. So much volume. We know that Switch is doing just amazing work here. Contact Nate directly at nate@switchrcm.com for more information. Thanks, Nate.
Thank you.
Now back to the show.
I think you're right on. You're onto something around. There is this, because I remember goes back in time, but I was involved in a shooting at a hospital early in my career, and I think part of that is, though, for a lot of people, and I felt the same way. There was this like violence can happen outside of the hospital, even right next to us. Like hospitals that are in the inner city,
Right.
are like
Sure.
I know the workers feel this way. It was like that can happen there, but here this is not the
Right, it's not coming in.
It didn't cross the line,
Right.
and I think when that happened, it crossed this line that people just had in their minds. Like it is an interesting thing where it's like, yes, it happens. It's now this is possible to happen here. Why would they do that? We do this altruistic thing for people. We save people.
We're
And I'm not saying
Aaron.
it's the same thing, but I think you're right.
No, I
you're not
think
wrong.
there's
And then there's
something-
something there around.
yeah,
like,
there's something around.
why
like,
would they do this to us? You know, like
But you don't
Right.
understand. So from the other side, what I'm doing is I'm putting out a range of IP addresses. I'm
Yeah.
scanning them.
They
and I'm
don't
enumerating
care.
Yeah,
it,
they
and some
don't
number
care.
pops
Right.
up, and I see the number, and I
Again.
start whacking away at that number. I have no idea what it's attached to, and I don't care. Once I get the information, it's like, how can I sell it? Right? Like that's what the hacker's thinking. That's
Right.
what they're
and
doing.
now they're like, oh, hospitals are like vulnerable.
right.
They're not as sophisticated as these other groups.
And they have a lot of
And they're gonna,
interconnected
like,
systems.
just get in.
Hospitals are very interconnected with a lot of systems. They tend to be like it's the feeling, right? The whole thing is patient care, right? And to your
Right.
point, that the whole industry needs to be educated in a way that they need to understand that. And a lot of people think their PC is safe, right? It's weird that people are like, oh, it's my PC. Yeah, but that doesn't make it safe in any way. Like, you know, it's really-
Right, or that your phone is, right?
Right,
It's
your
this
phone
thing,
is
it's part of me. It's
Oh,
in
yeah,
my
text
pocket.
messages,
It's-
by the way, use
Right.
Signal, right? If you really have a text message that's interesting today, you should not use, well, you shouldn't use our stuff for a long time because there's an attack on our telco system going on for years. But the one that's going on today is real. The text messages are compromised and they're saying use other systems. You know, I use Signal. A lot of reasons why I use Signal. I would recommend using Signal. That's
Wait,
the right.
what's Signal?
It's like WhatsApp, right?
Oh, okay.
It's
the
the
secure
private
messaging.
version of WhatsApp. It's not the meta version. It's a different. It's owned by an open source foundation and stuff. So, but like it's solid.
So when I text you, it's actually going through Signal.
No, when you text me, you're going through normal messaging,
Oh.
and somebody could be reading it. I mean,
That's not
you know,
secure.
hey, do you like Mediterranean food? yeah, that sounds good to me. Like, there's nothing interesting
Right.
in my
You
text.
don't care about that.
Right, like
Right.
I got nothing. That's why I'm just texting because I don't care, right? Like I would never send anything in my text like that I would care about, right?
You would use Signal or WhatsApp or something more.
I wouldn't
secure.
use WhatsApp, but I would personally use Signal or something I've used in the past.
I got you. Okay. Interesting. I just learned something new. I didn't even know what that
See?
was. Did you know
Anything
that?
could happen.
Does text message you guys go back and forth on Signal?
No, it's just regular.
No, it's just regular text
Just
messages.
regular.
But again, it's like, hey, what do you want on your pizza?
Yeah, it's not. Could you please text me your social security number? What were the other things I needed? 16-digit credit card. And,
the 3-digit code.
and your
that-
CVV or whatever.
Yeah,
it is.
right.
Yes, I,
She's like, we're not at that
What's your
level.
zip code again?
She's like, we're not at that level yet, Ramie.
No, I actually believe I.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, I
God,
have.
I don't
I
wanna
have
know.
your credit
I
card.
don't want to know.
Well, it's buying plane tickets.
Sure.
Sure.
No, we don't need to go that deep.
We don't need to go that deep. No, it's all very normal. Our text message.
Yeah, but like right now, if you look at
Regular.
right now, it's been going on, and they've found all these foreign infiltrators in our system, and they've been unable to dig them out. Like it was tough. There was a time in my life where I did a job that was kind of interesting. Small businesses would have an admin, and as the business grew from 1 to 100 people, that admin would rise through the ranks, and in so doing, he would put all of his back doors through all the PCs so he could manage them remotely. This was back in the 90s and stuff, and so when a company wanted to fire their admin, how did they get them out of there? They call a better admin. If the admin's a level 9, they get a level 10 admin to kick them out, right? Like that's what
Oh my
happens.
gosh.
So they call guys like me to kick them out.
Wow.
So it's interesting. That's what they're dealing with. They're trying to kick them out of the system. And that's part of the, when the blast radius of an incident happens, you determine the blast radius, you try and contain it, and then you try and dig the stuff out that they've left, right? Because an attacker will try and establish persistence. They'll leave garbage all over the place to call home and do all kinds of things to establish. You want the thing to be persistent, right? I always want to have a foot back in the door. So maybe a year later, it'll call me, right? I'll leave a bug on your system to call me a year later. You'll hunt it down. You'll be like, we're good to go. A year later, it calls home. Like that's what they're doing, right? That's what the attackers are trying to do right now. They're trying to establish persistence. They're trying to establish a forward plan. They're trying to, and so like the guys on the other side are trying to dig them all out of there, and they're looking for traffic, and they're sifting through all this traffic, and they're trying to pick that one needle out of the haystack that's that hacker, putting that persistence point someplace. And so that's what's happening right now. And until you do that, you get them out, right? It's hard. But like at the end of the day, there's always this moment when you go, did I get them? It's really it was an interesting problem. I used to do it with admins. When I would get an admin out of a small business network, I'd say, did I get them? I think I did. I think I got them. And it's really the same problem that we're dealing with today. Like when something's compromised at that level and that deep, what did they leave? Did they leave time bombs? Where did they put them? What systems are they on? What systems did they have access to? Do you know?
It's also why I'm surmising that's why they're shutting it down. Like they're shutting the system down completely.
Mm-hmm.
So like when it happened to McLaren said they lost their phones. They shut everything down.
Yeah, and so that's what happens. Nowadays is turn them off. The more modern architectures deploy infrastructure as code, so there's not the same concept. So you can tear everything down and then rebuild your system through a series of code, right? Like so. In the past, you would go and you'd mouse and keyboard and build a system like this. In the cloud, you don't do that. You program it. You use applications and you program it. So you say, I need a Kubernetes container and I need this server to do this, and you do it all through programming. So what happens now is if it gets blown up, you just move to another property and run the same code again, and boom, you're right back up, which is really neat. There's a lot of really good advantages to a lot of this stuff today if you're utilizing them, right? So there's repeatability and things. So that's the best way to get rid of somebody is to start over. Because you're always going to have that moment. Did I get rid of them? And in particular with things like rootkits, that was kind of a specialty in the past that people were doing, and they're coming back. I see more and more of them.
What is it?
Rootkit. It's called a rootkit, and here's the problem.
Sorry, did you know what that was?
Roots.
I understood what he said. I don't know what it is. I have just by the name, I have a guess, but
so it attacks your software in your machine. But like, there's one out there called the UEFI rootkit now, which is the hardware that boots your computer. So what it does is it puts its code in the hardware that boots your computer. So you go in and you go, you take it to Best Buy. You go, here, format my machine. And they format your machine and put a new copy of Windows on it. The first time you boot it, bam, it gets compromised.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
So
rootkits are deep, right?
Right. Like I was thinking it's like a tree.
Yeah,
and like the more
that's what it's like.
Yeah, and they spread.
They're down in the hardware. They're down in the firmware. They're down in places that are below the operating system that you can't see. So an operating system is running in a hardware container, but that hardware container is running all kinds of code. They call it firmware, but it's written in C often, which is code and whatever else. Like it's code.
So this just comes to mind. It might be controversial. We might have to take this out, but I'm curious to know, you're familiar with like Epic and like what it's written on an old language, mumps, I think, or something.
Mm. I'm not familiar with what language it's written on, but I mean, I
think it's called mumps.
Okay.
And it's old. It's not used anymore. In fact, they can't even really find developers for it.
Mm.
And I'm just curious, from your perspective, does that actually like a warning sign of like they actually aren't written on a modern architecture? Does that open them up for more problems in the future?
So
and I don't know the answer. I literally don't know the answer. I'm not surmising that they need to change their code. I just questioning, because like that's always come up in my mind is like that's like that was popular in the early 1980s, and it's not. No one builds anything out that anymore.
So it's funny. My stepmom's a COBOL programmer. So that gives you an idea of what was going. So I'm familiar with a unique skill set. Again, depth of knowledge before was important. Yeah, it's not now. It's a good example,
probably
right?
Just similar,
same problem, right?
Yes.
So the question is does an old language mean that it's bad? Not necessarily, and here's why. If they have very good security policies, very good security controls, and do really good management of static scanning and dynamic scanning and all these things, like they can build a system in something that could hurt them. They could use the tools that could hurt them, but still build a stable system. We do it all the time.
Okay.
Older languages do something called memory management, often poorly. There isn't so in the earlier languages, I'll give you an example, Fortran, C, and those types of things. I could kind of point at a memory address and say, right here. And it will do it. And that's good for me because I like to write on the stack pointer, which means I control your machine when I do that, right? New languages, you can't do that. there's an abstraction layer. There's a piece of software in between me and that memory address, and it abstracts it. So it's a lot harder to get out of my container to get to that address, right? So modern languages like Java or Rust and those types of things are memory safe languages, is what you hear being called, because they handle memory properly. There's advantages to non-memory safe languages in devices, absolutely, because you can address particular pieces of memory as a number, right? Like I can point at that memory and go, that's what I want to do. So there's advantages to them. They're very fast. Like non-memory safe stuff is very fast. So if you put in security controls to make things memory safe, they sometimes can get slower, right? Because you're putting in controls to make them safe. So there's all these trade-offs. So is it a blanket statement to say that one company should do X or Y? I don't know. If they've got 100,000 great developers in this language, then maybe that seems like a good choice for them, right? Like that's what I would think, right?
Okay.
So I wouldn't say helpful. Like blanket wise, but I'd say that languages that don't do internal memory management are often more susceptible to developers making big impact mistakes. If you make a mistake in a memory safe language, the impact may not be as big, right? Because I still can only bust into my container and I might get trapped in my container. Whereas if it's an unsafe memory language, it allows me to stomp all over the memory on the PC, and that's not what you want, or the device or whatever. So it depends on some of them, if they're compiled and they have some safety in them, it's good. But people can do that with old languages too, if they're skilled enough.
Right. Okay. That's not a limiting factor. It
I wouldn't see it that way.
Doesn't handicap them going forward. It's just like,
well, I mean, like I would say, like
they're doing the same types of things anyways.
Yeah, you'd have to get. So the thing going forward would be more like, how do I ensure that my code can be maintained in this language for the next 20 years, and how do I ensure that the colleges and the people who are pumping out proficient people are pumping out the necessary number of proficient people that I'm going to need to backfill the people that are leaving my organization, right? Like that would be a problem with a small language. Whereas a language like Python or something that everybody learns, like it's everybody can learn, right? Like
you're not gonna,
You're gonna find a Python developer,
right? You're gonna run out of people,
right? And so that's what I would say. So it becomes more of a struggle. Like my mom or my stepmom one time, she's like, I can make all this money, just do COBOL, but I hate it, right? Because they were just dying for COBOL, dying for them, right? They're like, we'll pay you anything.
They probably still would today.
Yeah, because the mainframes are still running. They're still printing out systems. Printing out paperwork somewhere in some plant, right?
Yeah. Have you ever seen Delta's reservation system?
I can hear it. This is the dot matrix printers.
They're still printing those.
Who was it who sent us the picture of that? Who sent us the picture of like the printer with the thingies on the side?
Yeah, the dot matrix printers for rollers. Yeah,
somebody
because
sent us
we were talking about there was. Somebody
I still had to find Ben's fax machine for Christmas.
Fixes it like they had a friend or something, a company that fixes those dot matrix.
Can you imagine having the parts for those?
They don't. So he's like, that person makes
so much money.
Ton of money.
Right.
Because nobody does it, right? You can't go down to Best Buy and buy a dot matrix
just
printer.
Supply and demand, right?
Right, sitting there waiting for the call.
Yeah. I worked with a company years and years and years ago. There was a fella, and I forget the name of the company, Modern Business Systems, but he had a very particular thing, and he did this particular port driver for this particular printer, and man, he had cornered the market on it, and he's like, you got to call me if you want it.
I got a friend who fixes jukeboxes.
Oh, that's cool.
Wow.
CDs and he bought Drone knows this guy, and he bought like a case of all the optical readers, He from like Sweden. You like went over there. I think you flew over there, right? You flew over to like Netherlands, got this whole case, got like 3,000, and he's still selling them today, and he just charges a huge premium.
Yeah, because he's got them.
Because no one can get them.
Right.
And there's audiophile guys too that have these like CD players that are like $100,000, Well, they need optical readers at some point.
Wow.
Isn't that funny? And he kept saying, I mean, this was I was talking to him probably 7 years ago, and at the time he's like, my business is going to end anytime. It should have been done 10 years ago. He's still doing it. He's still doing the same thing.
I only need to sell one a month.
Right.
Or fix one jukebox. And he goes, there's a lot of them moving to these digital, but there's all this other part where it's like, they still like to have
and there's
CD,
nostalgia.
Or a record player one.
Because sometimes you want the original, right? Maybe you don't want the facsimile of the original.
That's kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
It's like, but there's this niche thing where you get super niche, and you're like, you think it's dead, but you're the only one that does Fortran. Or COBOL,
right?
Like,
right. And you're all of a sudden.
All of a sudden, this one system. It's like
I don't know. We'll see in 20 years if that happens.
We'll see.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode of My Good Friends is brought to us by Switch RCM. And we've got Nate here today to talk to us about the incredibly fascinating topic of interest and penalties for payers.
Every hospital, or nearly every hospital and health system in this country, are owed interest and or penalties. But what we find when we talk to those hospitals and health systems, they can't answer the question of, are they being paid the correct interest and penalties? It's extremely difficult data to unlock, and we are able to unlock that using standard claims and electronic remittance data. So we're excited to give a level of insight into those interest and penalties that providers haven't had in the past.
And I can't tell you enough, folks, that no one in the country is doing this work at scale. And so these guys have figured it out. Contact Nate directly. Email him at nate@switchrcm.com and find out more info, because this is great stuff that they're doing. Thanks, Nate.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, back to the show.
I don't know, we have anything else to cover? What else?
Well, I was going to ask a question that maybe is irrelevant, but it's something I always think about, because when Ben and I talk about revenue cycle, my whole thing is like burn it down and start over. Just because, the transition from Susie and her notepad and her very special way of doing things to Epic has been a significant journey, right? Mm-hmm. And then I wonder, like, from a CIO, CTO perspective, did they rebuild the hardware systems to support what they're doing now? And is that a vulnerability? Is there someone there who has some old dial-up dot matrix printer?
Yeah,
I don't know.
So
because I think that technology hard cost is, plus Epic or whatever you've installed is just an enormous financial burden. So I have to imagine there's archaic actual like machinery inside these organizations. And is that also a vulnerability, or is it just a thing that needs to be.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have a funny story from early in my career about that one. And it deals with T1s, ironically enough. We had a bunch of T3s at the place I was working. And so I ran the PBX. The phone system is a soft phone system. And so there's these calls coming out of this area. And we kept, and our network scans kept coming up with this device that we didn't know what it was. And we couldn't find this thing, man. We didn't know what was going on. And so we're tracking it down. Where's this drop? We can't find this thing. And so we finally eventually locate it to somewhere in this general floor in this place, right? And it's a marketing floor at this should be secure facility.
Okay. All right.
So we're wandering around and we're looking, like, where is this thing? And I hear one of the guys go, "Oh!" And he opened up a closet door and there's a computer sitting on the floor plugged into a phone line that they had run up through the wall and around the thing or whatever. And that was their marketing server, quote unquote. And it was completely unsecured. Like if somebody would have hit that from the outside, you would have jumped on that. You would have gained control
system.
and then pivoted.
Oh my God.
Right? Like that's what happened, right? So that was commonplace in the past, right? In the past, it was commonplace. In the mid 2000s, like 2010 type area, you started seeing more from Cisco and Palo Alto and stuff like that, where they started recognizing devices being plugged into the networks. And so you're seeing a lot less of it now because you can turn things on and off at the port level and stuff like that. But at one point in time, the legacy hardware, it was a lot of times they just leave it running. And it was because some department needed some special program and that's the only way they could do it. And we see it in medical because it's like a specialty. So you walk into an operatory or something, there's a PC on the floor and you're like, what's that do? Oh, that's for the TMJ calculator. And you boot it up and it's running Windows 95. Like, I mean, that's reality, right?
Right. That's what I feel like that's real. Like
it happens.
That could be real, yeah.
Windows XP, it happens.
Right.
We see
and you talked about
Windows XP.
I don't remember if it was at
crazy.
HFMA. I think it was at HFMA. You talked about being able to attack a system via an external device that has a chip that's connected to the network in some way.
Yeah. So the idea, I guess, is this goes back to like we can take the inverse of people, right? So let's take the inverse of people that we said earlier about the attackers in the top level. Let's take the opposite look at this at the hardware level and software level. I only have to find your lowest lying vulnerability. So if you put all of your stuff in the safe and that's where all your digital assets are, that's good, and you don't have to worry about it. But if your stuff's kind of spread out, then I only have to find the lowest lying vulnerability. Now that vulnerability in a compliant company with good governance and with good change management processes is going to be relatively high, right? So it's not easy to get to, and you see this in larger funded organizations and people that have more expensive network equipment, right? That's kind of leading into the same thing. What's more likely now, if I was to do this, is I would if you really wanted to attack like the medical supply chain and wanted to get in, you would go for a softer target, right? So you would look at maybe like a downstream supplier, and you would look at their software, and you would look at what packages make up their software. Maybe look at their WANs, what they hire, those types of things. You would probably attack them, probably because these other systems are so hardened. But I guess I got lost in the first part of the question. So is the hardware vulnerability and is the software vulnerability? The answer is it's all a vulnerability. And so if you have a vulnerability that only takes a 5 to compromise,
right,
then a 5 can hit it.
Right.
And
so
that's
you're just
one of the
looking for
problems.
low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, and that's what they call
Oh,
exploits in the
yes.
wild. It is. It's low-hanging fruit, absolutely. And this is one of the biggest problems is some researcher goes, okay, I found this exploit, so I want to get in, the Super Hacker Hall of Fame, which you can do that. Your name can, there's places you can, submit your stuff. And
What?
so there's a lot of them.
Super Hacker Hall of Fame.
Well, Google has a Hall of Fame, and there's some other ones out there.
Okay.
They're pretty reputable for security guys. So.
All right.
So they want to do that, and or they call the company, and I've been involved in this things. They call the company and they say, hey, we got something bad on you. Like we're gonna hit you hard, and here's how we're gonna hit you or whatever, and you need to work with us or whatever. And so, so the low hanging fruit, and that's really what it's about now. So I think that the problem is to squelch all that out, and the lowest hanging fruit is going to be the person you send an email to.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and that's the difference. I think it goes back to the stuff that we talked about before, right? If you're going to go and attack a hospital, they likely have firewalls, they have AP level security, they have all these things that are there, right? But can I send a nurse a PDF?
Well, I think the hospital's even worse because
Or whoever.
the health system will have there'll be like a clinic in 100, 200 miles away. That's just a clinic with some staff at the front and for random, so it's not just like, oh, it's all I work for this big health system and I'm at this hospital and it's like I'm in this one. It's like no, it's spread out. It's everywhere.
Suppliers, they're plugged in all over the place.
Yeah, so you could have a Susie who works at the front desk and freaking.
So one of the jobs that I did,
Minnesota in the middle of nowhere, and she's getting.
Got
Like
a
you just
PDF
said,
about
she
an
just got a
exciting
PDF bomb and she got excited and she
holiday
opened it.
party. She's like, "What holiday party? Link
Ben's holiday party.
RSVP.
Can I go to that?"
Yeah, when I had a company and was running the company, there was a health system at the time rolling out Next Gen, and they were doing Next Gen to their clients, and there was a hospital system, and they had 50 doctors that were feeding this hospital system. They wanted to put a Next Gen server in all of these hospitals, and they hired our company to do it because the people that worked at the hospital couldn't leave the hospital grounds, and these were not in hospital grounds. So we were extension of their network, right? So we would go out and extend the hospital network with a VPN, plug that Next Gen server in, then plug all the servers into that. And it was an extension of their network, the hospital system's network. Absolutely, it was a complete extension. And were we outside of their purview? Yes. And now how does that happen today? I don't know. I'm sure they still hired third parties to do this type of work and stuff. Now we were responsible. We never had an incident. But certainly, these are the types of things
that was a different time,
right?
It was a different time.
Today's, I think, just the whole wild west.
Well, it is, I think, in a lot of ways, and I think that the noise of cybersecurity often is loud, right? Like because it's in your face every day, right? And that's really what it's about. I think it seems like the wild west because all you have to do is open up the front page. Oh, my text messages are broken today. What's broken tomorrow? My email system. What's broken? Like it's always what's broken of the day. I think we get kind of numb to the amount of attacks, and maybe there's not as much fears as we have. But like if you look at like the wars that are going on in the world today, like these are tech wars, 100%. Look at the tactics they're using. It's Wi-Fi jamming. It's drones with AI. It's the real deal. These are tech wars.
Right.
So you want to see where they're training to be hackers? They're training out there. That's where they're at, right? Like that's where they're going to be coming from. And those are the skill level of the people that are doing that is going to be immense.
That's the scary version, right? The scary version, there's a state sponsored.
Well,
kind
and
of
that's
thing,
the,
right?
yeah, nations, we always talk about that. We always talk about threat levels, right? And so you can say, hey, it's one guy in a basement with a computer who can do some stuff. Or maybe it's a business. So a lot of places, as I mentioned before, run like a software development business, like an agile development business, but they're hackers, right? So there's 5, 10 guys on a team and they're just running a software development business, but instead of developing good software, they develop bad software. So there's another threat level, right? That's a software version of a threat level. And then there's a nation state, which is entirely different.
Yeah.
It's not even on the scale of the others.
Right. It's a university versus a 12th grader.
Very much so.
PhD program.
PhD program
The
with lots of
the
students
resources
and
are,
lots of professors and tenure.
Yeah, the resources are different. So that's that threat with that vulnerability. So I guess if you think about it, you tie it all the way back to threats and vulnerabilities, right? We talked a lot about the vulnerabilities, as like you had mentioned, old hardware, old software on the network, things that are
Third
out
parties,
there.
right?
Yeah. And then when those vulnerabilities are met with a threat that can exploit those vulnerabilities, that's where the problem comes in. If that vulnerability exists and the threat doesn't have the level of knowledge or whatever to exploit it, it never gets realized, right? Mm-hmm. It's when those two things happen. When you have a threat with the level of technical sophistication to exploit the vulnerability, that is when it actually happens, right? Those two things happen, and that's all it takes, right?
Yeah. Well, Ramie, thanks for everything. Thanks for bringing your knowledge today, like a savant.
Scaring the people again.
Yeah, thanks for scaring everyone and taking care of Tina.
But it's good. It's almost like you need to know. It's knowledge is power, right? So it's better to know and maybe have some fear and act than to not know and be shocked when something bad happens.
As G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle, right?
Wow, I didn't know that's what G.I. Joe said, but I like it.
When we started in other industries, we used to call it FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so you could sell security products using FUD in the past. Now, the industries today that are matured won't accept those security products, but maybe medical would.
Oh, I think there's a lot of FUDs out there.
Right, so you can sell it.
Probably a lot of other
right. I mean, it's
letter
fear,
acronyms.
uncertainty, and doubt. That's how you sell security in the past, right? I don't think that's appropriate. I don't want to. I mean, I don't care for that. But to your point, that's really sometimes you need the fear.
It's
right?
real. It's real.
Yeah.
Well, but that's why in any situation, that's why you tell your kids about the things that could happen so that they're prepared for the things.
But it's also why we started an air marshal program.
Exactly.
And why it still exists today. Because
why we have police. Why
a
we
single
have
incident happened, and not one incident happened since then.
That's fine.
But that's okay.
That's the way we like it.
That's the way we like it, right?
Right.
So interesting.
Yeah. So you have to get them like, remember how like McDonald's used to have the signs like 2 million burgers sold or whatever. Remember that? Now it's like 0 incidents today.
100 million.
Yes, whatever.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Ramie. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rome.
My good friends, my good friends, my good friends. Do a little bit of everything, cause it takes a bit of everything. My good friends, my good friends, my good friends. Do a little bit of everything, cause it takes a bit of everything.
We'll have to put this at the end and charge Patreon for that section, Rome.
Get the story.
There you go.
Rome is with us today as well, everybody. That's why it's
we're
not
in
just
person.
an aside to the universe. We're in person. It's actually
cool.
here.
Yeah.
We don't get to very often. I don't know how to start this really. Do you want to introduce them? How do we do this?
Wow. Well, listen, listeners, I'll start.
Did we sit in this very room?
We sat in this very room.
And you told
4+ years ago.
A bomb went off. We're doing an intro podcast of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is it. And she's lays this one on where I didn't even know this was a thing. And then you're like,
right. But
I'm
this
dating
relationship,
someone, and I was like, whoa.
But this relationship was born in this very room through, and I hate to say his name out loud.
Don't say it.
Don't say it. A certain
him
fella
who shall not be named.
He who shall not be named.
He who shall not be named.
We did a recording. He talked throughout the recording about his super smart friend who solved problems with math. Remember?
Yes, I can't forget it.
Afterwards, and now it's COVID times because it was 2020, and we're standing in the parking lot, and he said to me, because this is when we proposed the idea of doing a live show, stadium seating for one of my dates. Remember this? We were going to sell to Kevin.
Stacey.
I'm sorry, I said the name.
No, I'm actually pausing
I was
because
like,
I don't remember.
This is a better story.
I said the name. I didn't mean to say the name. But we proposed the idea of me having one of my dates meet me and have like an audience available to witness and record.
And to judge.
And there was going to be ticket sales. There was a whole scene built around it.
Because at this point, we had done like,
Oh yeah,
there were different times where she'd gone through her list of qualifications, right?
Oh, I've seen the list.
He knows the list.
Yeah. He hit the list.
He did a great job. Yes,
majority.
He did. And then, so in the parking lot post that interview, that's when he who shall not be named said, "So Tina, do you want a boyfriend?" And I said, "I don't know. Maybe it'd be nice. Hard to say." Proceeds to show me a LinkedIn. If anyone wants to pull up LinkedIn on their phone right now, pull up a profile of someone and that teeny tiny picture, the size of a dime. I don't have my glasses on. I don't know what this fellow looks like. He's like, here he is. And I was like, whatever.
By the way, at halftime, I meet those people and I'm like, that's not
you.
what you look like anymore.
Right.
Just so we're on the same page.
It didn't matter because I couldn't see it anyway. So it didn't matter. And then a couple weeks later, we went on our first date with he who shall not be named, joined us. But he was.
Oh, he was there.
He was there.
I think I forgot that part.
All three of us went on a date. They were very bro friendly. I would say that Kevin, again, I said his name. Damn it.
Yeah, you can't say his name.
Sorry. Rome, we're going to need to edit that out.
Yeah, I'm not edit it out, Rome.
Just
so
bleep.
It's only
just put a beep over it. That'll be good.
Voldemort instead. Just
yes.
like Voldemort.
Voldemort. He was a very good wingman. He was setting up the situations. Ramie was hitting him out of the park.
I can only imagine him just loving that scenario.
For sure. And
on
at the
so
time,
many levels.
My daughter worked at the restaurant where we were. So the staff all knew me.
Oh God. Did you know that?
No.
But we found out during dinner.
No.
During dinner, we found out because the waitress was like, "Oh my God, I love your daughter."
Right. Yeah. They started coming up and saying hi. I was like, "Yeah, okay, now I see."
Yeah,
It
and we
was
were
a
only
setup.
supposed to.
He's like, this is a setup.
Right, and it was when in Michigan restaurants were open and they closed again and
Oh,
they
yeah,
reopened. So it was
terrible.
while they were
Terrible
open.
Yeah.
So
Like
we only
sparse
were supposed to have
tables.
we were only supposed to have our table for 90 minutes. I think we were there for 3 hours because it was supposed to be for drinks only. It was drinks and then dinner and then finally we all left. And then I don't think we had another date for a couple weeks because I was busy because, that's how I do.
It was also the pandemic.
Yes.
I mean, yeah,
and
it
then our
wasn't
next
easy,
date,
like,
right.
yeah.
And I was, doing my things. And
Mhm.
then our next date, because now the restaurants were closed, and Ben does know this story, is the first time I went to his apartment and there was no furniture upstairs.
Oh, yeah. No, we've talked
which
about
I
the Dexter
said-
situation multiple times.
The Dexter.
Is there a room wrapped in
Yes, the
plastic
Dexter
here
situation.
that I should worry about?
I brought it up before she did. I was like, wait a second. Was there plastic anywhere like all over the walls?
No, I brought it up.
No, I'm remodeling.
Direct.
Are you?
No, he had won a prize, right, from
Yeah.
his current employer, a
Yeah.
manufacturer.
Yeah, and
Not to be
and
named,
was
also
just, and
Voldemort.
I just bought a new couch and it was on the way. And
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. You had
So there was
furniture coming,
there
yes.
was furniture down. There was
explanation.
furniture elsewhere. There
There's
was
an
also
explanation.
I'm just to put this down. I don't think we've talked about this. So all of this like cat furniture, right? So there's like a cat castle, and I was like, "Where's the cat? Like, do you actually have a cat, or is this a ruse?
Or in the back of your mind, you're going, how many cats does he have?
What's happening?"
Because I kind of wanted to know.
And actually, it was very sweet. He had his cat was very sick. Who was a kitten who was very sick.
Aw.
Who is now rules the roost, I believe. I mentally calls Ramie the butler. It's my because he comes and yells at
All
him like,
cats.
"I need food.
All
I
cats
need
do that,
this," and
actually.
yeah.
That's
So
most cats.
yeah.
But I was like, "Could you show me where the cat is?" Because
Thought maybe there wasn't a cat.
I know I was like, "Why do you have all this cat furniture and there is no cat?"
There were a lot
like,
of flags popping
yeah.
up, and I'm like,
So
I
I
gotta
was
knock
just
these
clearing them
down.
out. I figured,
Yeah,
like, yes,
clear
best
them
to
out.
ask
Okay.
questions now than to wonder in the future or to, wake up in a trunk or something somewhere
It's good. And look at that.
surrounded by cat toys.
4
And
years
look at
later.
this.
Four
And
years
look at this.
later.
4 years later.
Here we are.
Cat toys and all.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think I talked to you for like 6 hours on that date. And the next day I was like, oh no. Oh no, did I talk too much?
Oh,
I'm
that
not sure
really-
that's
yes,
shocking
I
for
remember
everybody.
that. I remember that.
That I would have talked too much. And you said the perfect thing. You said, I listen to you talk all day.
And I do.
And there it is. Listen,
And
maybe
there it
that's
is.
the balance in the relationship.
That's a great response.
I'm the talker,
And
he's
I do.
listener. He is deaf in one ear, so maybe that helps.
Oh, maybe that's what he's like. She was talking a lot, but I didn't understand all of it. I was just picking up some of it. Oh.
Maybe he's like, I'll just smile and nod.
Well,
Yeah.
Ramie's here. We should ask him something about this. Like, what
Yeah,
was
what's
your
your-
what was your first impression?
Oh, it was cool actually. So my friend said, "Hey, there's this really good looking girl, and she's really nice, and you got to meet her, and want to go have a drink." I'm like, "Okay, we'll go have a drink," and that's what it was. And so he's like, "Oh, we'll go to Clarkston and."
Oh, you didn't get a picture?
Huh? No, he was like a LinkedIn, right? So it's the
It's
same
got a
type
little
of thing, the
teeny
thing,
LinkedIn,
yeah,
little
same
teeny
thing,
thing. And I'm
right.
like, sure, why not? Whatever. And so we went out there, and pretty much it was funny. It was when she got there, I was like, oh, I'll go to the door and make sure she knows where to go. Little did I
An
know.
excellent move.
I felt
by
like
the
a
way.
fool, right? Because she was coming differently. So we were already there. So I went up and I walked to the door, and I remember she was wearing a big furry thing. It was cool, and like, oh wow, that's striking.
I come in
That's
with
what I remember.
glamour, you know.
Yeah, there was a lot of
That's how you
glamour.
roll.
Like, striking, and then
Oh.
yeah, and sure enough, and then of course, hey, the table's over here. She's like, oh, that's nice, but of course, you knew all of the tables in there.
Well, I didn't know where you were
I
seated.
didn't, right? I
mean,
didn't know.
It's a
I'm like,
setup, man. He was a
right.
setup. Yeah, you were
then
the
when they
setup.
start
But it was
You
really
didn't
nice
know.
because we were all wearing masks
Yeah.
at the time.
Oh,
So the
God,
fact
that's
that like
right.
he came to the door and was like, Tina, and I was
Right.
like, wow.
Right.
And he had good shoes on, everybody. Anyone who's listening. Gentlemen, wear your good shoes.
Yeah.
Wait. Like, good. What kind of good shoes?
Okay,
Like, what are we talking
Now
about?
we're gonna roll back to
Not my not
No,
my
no.
type of good shoes.
no. If it were a quality good pair of sneakers, I'm
Okay,
here for it.
okay.
I had been on many a date with a gentleman wearing obviously like worn down Skechers
Oh.
or
Ooh.
like dirty, like comfortable shoes, perhaps. Let's call them that. Probably
But
like the shoes
worn.
so they could like mow the lawn in or
Yeah.
whatever. Like obviously not refining the details of what they're doing, like not putting their best foot forward, so to speak. I want to say you were wearing like a Cole Haan lace up, like an Oxford.
I
of
think
some
they were
kind.
Rockports at the time,
Oh,
but yeah,
there it is.
might have been because it was winter. My winter ones were
It wasn't winter. Well, it was November.
November
That's right.
10th. It was.
Yeah.
Oh, it was winter.
Well, I mean, it was cold.
Yeah.
It was cold. But yes, he was wearing a good shoe.
Get your dates
And he came
right,
to the door and he
you know?
had a mask on and he knew who I was. And I was like, how does he know who I am? And if I had parked like right out front. I think that's what you said. Like I saw you get out of your car.
Yeah, and I had I had an idea and I could see, but with the mask on, it was tough. But
It's weird, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
remember, like you'd see people only with a mask, and then
Mhm.
they finally take it off, and
You're
you're like, I did not picture that.
I had the weirdest experience with that. I was doing a photo shoot and I was working with a photographer and his staff and they were all like, we wear masks when we're, in offices, whatever, great, like whatever. And we'd scheduled lunch during the photo shoot and I took my mask off and the photographer's assistant was like, wow, you are so pretty. And I was like, so what was I with the mask on? Like, I was like, what are you saying to me?
Only the
Okay,
eyes.
thank you. My eyes are not pretty. Apparently, you just need the whole thing. Make it work. Anyway.
Well, it's true. God, it's hard to even remember those times.
Da 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 da.